to It's About Time Conversations with Charlize and Yolanda, where we bring our experiences and our expertise to the table to address relevant topics that impact our lives and our communities. This is the place to be authentic, be transparent, and be inspired. And we welcome you to our table. I'm Charlize Lewis.
And I am Yolanda Mason. Hello to all of our listeners and those who are joining us on live. Thank you so much for joining us this week. So today, our topic is about diversity and equity in education. And as I'm sure many of you know, many who work in education know, there's a term that we have now begun to associate with education. Whenever we talk about it, we talk about this idea of, quote, closing the achievement gap. And so as the work and the research have expanded, we've realized that this term also encompasses gaps in knowledge, in access, and in resources. There are so many factors that impact students' learning.
And so today we have with us Dr. Roger Cleveland, who is the Director of Faculty Diversity and Development at Eastern Kentucky University. I have known Dr. Cleveland for a little over, about 20 years now.
Probably so, yeah.
Yes, about 20 years. And he's known for his insight into issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as looking at cultural competence and closing the achievement gap. He also works with the Black Males Working Program. He and his wife, Audra, they have 3 wonderful and brilliant children who are scholars in their own right. And so, Dr. Cleveland, we're just going to get to it, and welcome to our table. We thank you for accepting our invitation. And so we want to talk a little bit about your role at EKU, and why is this role important to the institution and to the faculty and the students that you serve?
Oh, well, first of all, let me say thank you to you and Yolanda for inviting me to have this conversation. Looking forward to it. And so getting back to my role at EKU, primarily I've been asked to and assigned to really work with our faculty around issues around diversity, equity, inclusion, cultural responsiveness, cultural humility, things of that nature, providing trainings and things of that nature, primarily on the academic affairs side of the university, but really also trying to recruit a faculty of color. We know we need that, that's important. The president said it's important. So we created this position primarily for that, is to recruit faculty of color. So if anyone's out there who has a doctorate, want to teach, we're looking for folks. Come on down and let me know. Since this is live, you can just hit me up. And so we'll try to do something with that. But the other part is really about, it's important that students see folks who look like them. And it's also important for students, particularly our white students, to see diverse faculty. If we're preparing them for a global society, then they need to be able to navigate in diverse spaces. So it's not only just for our students of color, our Latinx students and African students, for all our students at EKU. It's only going to better them when they leave our university.
I was thinking about how I applied for a job some time ago, and one of the questions was, how did you define diversity, equity, and inclusion? And so when I think about that, people have their standard definitions of what they think and how they internalize it, and then outwardly express what they would define those terms as. But this is the opposite of that. What is it not? What is not diversity? What is not equity? And what is not inclusion?
Well, diversity is not only race, class, and gender. Because when we think about it, that's what we usually compartmentalize it in, just those 3 areas. But it could be diversity in thought, it could be diversity in ability, it could be a number of different things, but we usually hone in on those 3 areas. Inclusion is just not inviting folks in, right? There's always the saying that diversity is having a party, inclusion is inviting you to the party, but belonging is like dancing like nobody's watching. That you have this true authenticity, that you can be yourself in that space. So it doesn't stop at inclusion, right? And equity, you can't address equity until you acknowledge people, who they are and their experiences. And you also cannot address equity without including people. And so all those things are under the auspices of equity, diversity, inclusion, and things of nature. Equity is not only about addressing needs, but it's about fairness. And one big thing that Yolanda talked about a minute ago about gaps and things like that, part of the issue around that is access. Who gets access to rigorous curriculum, right? Who gets access to programs? But not only putting people in the programs, but addressing their needs and providing support when you put them in those programs. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you. I think your audio just clicked off, Yolanda.
Did y'all want to hear me? Yeah, okay, I'm here. Sorry about that, Dr. Cleveland. So first of all, I really love how, as a diversity officer, you've like expanded the definition and expanded what it really means to be inclusive, what it really means to be diverse. As a social worker by trade, I can definitely relate to how you talked about moving past just opening the door and saying you can come in, to making folks feel comfortable in that space and to creating spaces that are really conducive for people to connect. And so I really like that. In kind of preparing for the show, of course, I did a little Google research, very educational, very academic, and I found out that you have actually trained Fortune 500 companies, school systems from coast to coast, and state educational agencies. I'd like to know, what are some of the greatest challenges that you have seen in these places and experienced?
Well, it really depends on what the content is. So if the content's on like something around instructional equity, closing opportunity gaps, it's usually not a lot of resistance in general, but when you start getting to issues around microaggressions, implicit bias, racial equity, which we talk about equity, we want to talk about racial equity. When we start talking about those areas, that's kind of the resistance, because people fall back into this issue of feeling guilty, fragile, white fragility, and those kinds of things. And a lot of the times it's really not, it's part of it. Sometimes it's either ignorance, you just don't know. And sometimes it's indifference, right? I don't really care. And so then there's some people in the middle, right? You got some people in the middle, then you got people indifferent, and you got folks that are ignorant. I can deal with ignorance. I'm ignorant about a lot of things, right? That means you just don't know. Right. The issue is that you want to stay that way. And you can't stay that way and call yourself an educator or a practitioner. Whether you're a social worker or educator, whatever you are, you can't stay there. We always ask the students to be lifelong learners, but we don't want to model that. So the resistance is usually when you get to issues, particularly around race. Yeah. We can talk about a lot of things, and then what space you're in, what part of the country in. You can talk about race, and then sexual orientation is a pause right there. So it just depends on where you are and what the content is. But usually, rather, like whatever you research, you probably know I did something similar like that in Alaska, right? And I've done stuff like that in Mississippi. So people are receptive of it. Not necessarily everyone, but it also depends on your space. My approach is this, Charlize, especially the tough subjects, particularly right now. My approach is grace, because everyone's at a different place on an entire spectrum. Charlize may be here as it talks about issues around anti-racist education. Yolanda may be here and I may be there. So my approach is I'm gonna give you grace initially. So it's grace, civility, then accountability. That's so good. I'm gonna give you grace wherever you are, but doing a civil conversation, but I'm gonna hold you accountable afterwards. I can see Yolanda 5 months down the road and you still at the same space we talked about. And so and I know both y'all feeling that grace piece, right? That's what y'all do,
absolutely.
Right? So
absolutely.
Why should it be any different than we're talking about? We're teaching. When you're teaching the Bible, you give people grace, right? And so why not give people grace and civility? One thing we've lost in this country is having civil conversations. Because we all, because we're prisoners of the pronoun. I. And so we get stuck like that. So
yes, sir. And go ahead, Charlize.
I was thinking about that, and when we worked all at KDE and federal programs and instructional equity, and we would go in and do those trainings in districts, and how Ooh, some people will come out mad, furious.
Ooh.
Some people would be bawling, crying because you hit them in a spot that was a trauma place, a place of trauma, and you took them to a past memory, or maybe somebody was crying because they did feel the guilt. And then you had people who were just straight up mean spirit about it altogether. I remember getting on one of our evaluations, I wish the presenters were more diverse. Those were just the things that we would face going in when we were doing those trainings. And so that's why when we talk about challenges are not about the content, they're about the response to the content a lot of times.
Absolutely. But Charlize, I think what you added to that is powerful, because I hear you talking about the fact that whenever we hear information that for us represents any kind of breakthrough, all a breakthrough is information that I didn't have before, right? I think that when you talked about those emotional responses, you never know where it can hit folks when you start talking about things like race. And that's why I think, Dr. Cleveland, it's incredible. I love what you said. You said grace, civility, and then accountability. And I feel like having that stair-step approach to it, I feel it's spoken like a true educator. And that's something I remember. So if you hear it again, just know I will say I heard this from Dr. Roger Cleveland.
That's all right.
So,
Charlize knows that educators beg, borrow, and steal. So
yes. Yes. I definitely have to borrow that, because that was just an excellent way to look at that and to think about it. So thank you so much for that. And I know that our listeners have enjoyed that as well. So now I kind of want to switch gears just a bit. Again, kind of pulling on the real educator in you and just thinking about African-American males in education, as you know and are so aware, when we've talked about things like the school to prison pipeline, when we've talked about things like closing these gaps, often at the helm of those conversations are our thoughts about Black males. And so thinking about the teachers that are teaching in the classes, do you feel that African-American males are still kind of an anomaly when it comes to K through 12 classrooms? And also, we know that they've largely and traditionally been staffed as white female / middle class types of energy, and that's the way that the classes are set up and run, because typically it is middle class white females who lead those classrooms. So what do you think about that? Have we made any progress when it comes to African American males in the K through 12 educational experience?
Unfortunately, Yolanda, we haven't. The numbers are pretty low. We have a program. We have a program at EKU called Call Me Mr. And it came out of Clemson University, probably 20 years ago, by Dr. Roy Jones. And he started a program trying to get African-American males, particularly for elementary teachers, which we always have shortage of male teachers in general in elementary, regardless of ethnicity. And so we started that program at EKU, and it really took off, and then it's kind of died down a little bit. One of the primary reasons that African-American males are not going into education like they used to, for a number of different reasons. We all could probably talk about different reasons why they do not. But so it's still a shortage, unfortunately. But my thinking is this: I hate to use that old adage that you got to build a plane while you're flying it. I hate saying that, but the reality is this: in Kentucky, with our population 8% African-American statewide, we're never going to have 20%, 25% African-American teachers in our classrooms, much less African-American males. But that don't mean you stop trying to recruit and nurture those folks as much as possible. We're probably going to go to our grow your own type of thing, more so than trying to just go out randomly, going all around the country trying to recruit people to Lexington or to Kentucky. But we continue to do that. But at the same time, we prepare our teachers, regardless what they look like, to be able to teach all our children. That's the real issue, is that the majority of our teachers are not being necessarily trained to teach all children. And I don't put that on the teachers. I'll put it on the folks who prepare the teachers. That's on us.
Absolutely.
So we need to do both, really. We need to be able to recruit and retain African-American male teachers, Latinx teachers, a number of different folks, but at the same time, we know we're not gonna have critical mass, but we need to train our teachers, regardless what they look like, to be able to teach those, regardless what they look like in the classroom.
Yeah.
And if I can ask kind of a follow-up question to that, if you don't care, I'm thinking about, because I think it's imperative what you talked about. I love that you're focused on root issues. So you're not dealing with outcomes. You're thinking about how do we change it going forward, and how do we change things with what we do have now? Because we don't know what's going to happen in the future in terms of recruiting. So when you talk about better preparation, how do we start that conversation? Because I've heard that before, but I wonder, is that about going into universities and challenging them or talking with them about how they train the teachers, making them more aware of what the issues are in K through 12? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's been going on also. Most of the teacher education programs have improved on looking at making sure that when the teachers leave our programs, not just EKU, all our universities, that they're prepared to teach anyone. So that has improved. You'll see that in different programs, curriculum instruction, things like that. We have room for improvement. Don't get me wrong,
Absolutely.
but it's not as bad as it used to be. But the other piece around this, Yolanda, is that not only in Kentucky, where principals hire teachers, when other states, the district hires teachers.
Yes.
So until you get some African American male principals,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
Then we need more of those so we can actually start. They can see the importance of that also. Not saying that folks don't, but it'd be definitely more of a focus. We do that. Unfortunately, what happens is that when we do get African American male teachers, they're not prepared to be principals because they're either doing special education, always doing discipline. All kind of road is non-academic. And so when it's time for them to interview for a principal's job, they can connect with families and parents, they can connect with kids, they can deal with the climate of the school, but they don't know instruction.
Right.
Because they're never put in the position.
Yeah.
They'll never get stretch assignments to show their expertise. So they're never going to be a principal unless you get that instructional piece. And it's not because they can't they don't get the opportunities, which is an equity issue.
Wow. And I just think, to me, that piece right there, first of all, the things that you're saying, like, it is my prayer that as this goes out over the airwaves, that educators are able to hear this and that districts are able to hear it. Because I know that there's some people that I'm going to definitely share this with. I wish there were more yous. You can't be everywhere at once, but what you're offering, our school systems need in the greater Lexington area and across Kentucky. So, I'm trying to put it all on your back, Dr. Cleveland, because that's good stuff. The last thing that I wanted to talk about too, and what you talked about before kind of leads into this question. So when we talk about recruiting more minorities, when we talk about the intentional approach to attracting and bringing Black males, more minorities, Latinx, all kinds of diverse populations of teachers into the classroom, what do you think are the challenges? What are the barriers? What are the things that may stop them from being able to come? I know you talked about preparedness, and that's definitely one. What are some other things that you see, Dr. Cleveland?
Some other things are barriers for African American males to become teachers.
In terms of the recruitment process, so like what could they do better in terms of attracting minorities, and not just African American males, but Latinx, Black women, all kinds of diverse populations?
Well, first of all, I would say to recruit all teachers, because there's a shortage of teachers, and then retirement is going to hit us pretty soon. It's going to hurt the teaching core, not only in Kentucky but nationally. And then with the pandemic and things like that, you're going to see a lot of retirements. What I'll call, post-COVID, you're going to see that. But specifically to teachers of color, I think we need to look at our entrance requirements. I think it's important that students come in with the background and foundation coming out of high school. But my personal opinion, I think we put too much emphasis on ACT scores.
Okay.
And you see now that the Ivy League schools are not even really focusing
They've
on
dropped it.
APT
I
and
saw
GRE
that.
and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I'm not saying you should be able to get the teacher education program with a 16,
Sure.
but you don't need a 25 either. So I think you need a mixture, and a lot of teacher education programs are going to that, looking at your GPA, which is 1, which, you know, that's very subjective because, you know, one high school across town, they're 3.5 is something totally different from another side of town in different cities.
Absolutely.
So that's subjective. ACT, well, to some degree, that's about access. So you got somebody who can train you and prep you for the ACT, because ACT is all about vocabulary and knowing how to take the test.
Yes.
Right. So some people are getting all that to do that, and then some folks and you know who's not getting it is the group we're talking about. So that hampers their ACT getting into the teacher education program, and then also like an interview, looking at your dispositions, which is really important. Also, it's a non-academic factor, but it's important. So I think revisiting our entrance exams to get into not only the major in education, but to actually get into the teacher education program, because you can major in it, that don't mean you're gonna get in the teacher education program.
Right.
So that piece is right there. And then also a larger, more global factor is creating a climate on your campus for students of color.
That's right. Good.
So regardless what their major is doing that. And so students got to want to be there. You got to make it conducive for those students also.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Let me come back to 2 things that you said. There is still and has been a disconnect between what is being learned in the college major versus what is the reality of the classroom. I have said this time and time again. That is why you will see somebody teach for 2 years and say, you know what, I'm going to work for the state.
Yes.
Because I was not ready for this, and I was not prepared for this. And I'm all about bridging gaps. Gaps are not just, you know, closing achievement gaps. You have gaps in communication that are from the high school into the transition into post-secondary education. And I think that is one of the places that need to be filled in. What is the reality of what does the classroom look like really from day to day? Because, you know, my student teaching assignment might not have really been the full experience. And definitely during a pandemic, you're not going to get the full experience. So I really still firmly believe, I stand on this, that there needs to be more communication at that level. What is actually the reality of what a classroom looks like? I might go take a behavioral class.
Management.
Yeah. And then I get in there and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. So it is definitely still that gap there.
One of the things I used to do, I think one of the things you're talking about for students matriculating from high school to college, there's a distinct difference between college eligible and college ready.
Oh man.
Yeah. Okay. You know you're on my street now.
So we have to make sure we distinguish that first of all. Just because you have the GPA don't necessarily mean you're mentally prepared for that. You know, so one of the things I used to do when I taught at Moorhead and when I was teaching undergrad at Eastern is the first 2 weeks, I would bring them to Fayette County and Jefferson County. And so I would use Tate Street campus. These are like freshmen and sophomores. So I'm like, if you really want to go into education, well, we need to see it live firsthand.
Oh, wow.
Before we touch a textbook. What that does is when I take them to the elementary, Tate Street Elementary, Tate Street Middle, and Tate Street High.
Oh, wow.
Very diverse schools, right? They get to see all 3 levels, because first thing they walk out, I want to be an elementary teacher. I want to be middle school. You think you do. You don't know. When you get to a middle school, you got to have 2 things to work in the middle school. That's aspirin and a sense of humor. If you don't have those 2, don't you? You know, so they say that. But once I take them through that, and we do that for like the first week or so, look how hungry for information they are when they come back to the classroom. Because they have all kinds of questions, and those questions are touching all the areas that I'm going to talk about the rest of the semester. Right? So the thing is, the best classroom is exposure, and the best teacher's experience.
That is so good.
And so they get those 2 before they're, you know, we ever crack a book open. And that's always worked for me. And, you know, we have a lot of professors at EKU and CNI, curriculum instruction, that do a really good job at that also. And so we just have to get them in there. I'm not worried about them. You know, once they get there, we just got to get them in there and prepare them, support them, and they'll be fine. But you're right. Going back to that, college eligible versus college ready, that's that gap right there.
Yeah, that's a word.
Back on my street again. There was one more thing that I think that we kind of touched on, but we didn't stay there long. We are in a full-fledged pandemic still.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there are issues that students are dealing with that have absolutely nothing to do with academic. So talk a little bit to that and the social emotional learning piece of that.
Okay, so let me mesh equity and SEL together. Okay, social emotional learning. I've been telling school districts that really had a lot of training on equity and things like that. The best way to explain equity is through the lens of this pandemic. So imagine Charlize, Yolanda, Audra, Roger, and Sam, right? We're all out in the ocean. And we're all in the ocean in the middle of this storm. And the storm is made up of COVID-19, racial injustices, economic strain, and emotional trauma. That's the storm. But we're all in this storm together in the ocean, but we're situated differently. So Charlize is in this ocean liner. So she's feeling the storm, right? But Yolanda is in a yacht. So she's feeling the storm even more than Charlize is.
Wow.
Audra is in a traditional boat. So she's really starting to feel it, right? Roger is in a life raft. And Sam is on a life preserver. So we're all we're in the middle of the storm, but we're situated differently. So you can't use universal strategies when people are in different situations, but in the larger situation.
Preach.
Charlize needs something different. Yolanda needs something different. Audra needs something different. Roger needs something different. Sam needs something different, even though we're in the same situation. And how Charlize deals with this experience is going to be different than Yolanda and Roger and things of that nature.
Absolutely.
So when our kids go back to school, fully go back to school, particularly like Fayette and Jefferson, because some of the districts already been in, as much as important as the teaching and learning part is, our students have experienced a lot of trauma. Whether it's living on the same block as Breonna Taylor, they got to go back to school, right? Watching the issue of George Floyd, watching him die on CNN or whatever station you're watching. That's traumatic. Losing a loved one because of the pandemic.
Very much.
And then you have teachers who love their children and they see all the trauma their children are going through. Now they internalize that. Now they have secondary trauma.
Absolutely.
And then the racial injustice piece, they bring it in there. You don't know what kind of trigger is going to be. You're teaching, you're doing your thing, Charlize, and she's just teaching. She says something in a social studies class that triggers that trauma that kid experienced last summer. They had been in school all year and he had a chance to express it or do anything like that. So the question is, who's negotiating and facilitating those conversations when those students or those teachers are experiencing this trauma? And so I think that is so much more just as important as making sure our kids are reading on grade level by next August. Because they may not be there, right? They're not there yet. So that's what I'm thinking about. I'm just telling all the districts to be mindful and mindfulness, right, about that. And then you got self-care for teachers. I've been telling teachers,
come on,
give the world the best of you, not what's left of you, right? And our teachers have to take that also, take that consideration. We worry about our children, which is important, but if you're not taking care of yourself, and you know that, social worker.
Yes, very much so.
How are you bringing your best into the classroom if you're not considering yourself and your self-care and things of that nature? So this non-academic social emotional piece is just as important as the teaching and learning as we go back post-COVID.
Can I, Charlize, do you mind if I jump in really quick too? Because I'm sorry, Dr. Cleveland, you are just first of all, if you wanted to come on here and preach, you could have just said that, okay? Because I'm over here like
that's Robert Lewis's thing. I don't want to steal his thunder.
I just want to let you know I'm Baptist. I'm the rowdy Baptist. I don't know if that's an official, but we get a little rowdy. We throw hymn books. I mean, and seriously, you know, jokes aside, the things that you're saying are just digging into my heart, because literally, as a social worker, these are the things that I'm thinking about. So I kind of want to just share a little piece of something to ask a question. So in thinking about what you just said, this psycho-emotional, the idea of environment, sorry, I couldn't get that out, environment and all of those things. I'm thinking about post-COVID, when we started back, you know, a little bit more on campus at UK, where I'm finishing my grad degree. It was interesting because I don't even consider myself necessarily someone who gets triggered a lot. I tend to let things roll. But we did an assignment, and the professor is amazing. I love her. I admire her. But she gave us an assignment related to how to know if you are prejudiced, or if you maybe have racist type tendencies, or say things that would be considered racist. And I literally, as I was reading through it, I had to read these statements that were some very racist, because you would have to put that out there in order to assess, right? And literally, I found myself like kind of getting tears in my eyes. I found myself shaking a bit and having to walk away from it. And that experience, I didn't expect to be triggered by it. But when we came back together via the discussion board, I found out that many people were triggered by it. So I was upset and had to put it to the side and come back to it. And I kind of just whipped through it, because I really didn't want to read those statements. It was very triggering after the summer that we had in 2020 and all of those things. And then other students were posting, some white students, some Black students. Some white students were saying it felt uncomfortable to read it. I felt attacked. Some Black students were saying, why would you make us read it? It turned into something that my professor really didn't expect. It was very controversial in a way. But when I came home thinking about that, I imagine that if we felt that way, as, you know, it's grad school, so it's kind of like, you know, non-traditional students more so. But if we felt that way and we felt very triggered, I immediately, because I'm a substitute at Fayette County, started thinking about those kids. And what I kind of wanted to ask you is, all of those things that you talked about are so amazing in terms of how we look at how the kids are situated, as you said, what their environment looks like. I thought about the fact that Zoom literally opened the door for many teachers to understand what their students go home to, right? Literally, they didn't know what was happening. They didn't know that while they were trying to teach, that there are 2 cousins living in the house, a mama, 2 aunties, and a boyfriend, not judging anyone's situation, but all of that's happening. There's music, there's TV, there's noises, the dog is barking, and all of these things are happening, right? So my question for you is, how important is it going to be post-COVID for us to try to understand the environment that our students leave to come to school, and how do we prioritize? Because I think teachers feel so overwhelmed sometimes, and rightly so. It can be very overwhelming, but how will they prioritize all of those things? Like when you mentioned the biopsych side, when you mentioned the emotional side, when you mentioned the environmental side, all I could think was, how would teachers prioritize that, along with the testing, along with the curriculum? Can you give any insight about that for teachers who may be listening to this?
Well, let me first say that there's a lot of other people that has a lot stronger and deeper knowledge base around SEL than myself. So I had to do my own research. So some other folks may have better ideas. But to put the equity part in there first, to get to your question, is that equity is not giving a kid a device and a hotspot, right? Because if you don't have the environment to do the work, if you don't have the adults to support you in the work and all those things, you know, you're not addressing that student's needs. And so, yes, it opened up the window. All COVID, all the pandemic did was expose the pandemic a lot of children already been living in, right? There's been a racial pandemic. There's been a poverty pandemic, access pandemic, and that's what COVID did, expose that. Now, a lot of teachers already knew that. The larger population, you know, was either indifferent,
yes,
or ignorant. So, but many of our teachers knew that. But as you said, you put so much, teaching is hard work and hard work. And you put a lot of that on our classroom teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not an either or priority. I think teachers will need support.
Okay.
One of the greatest positions that we have in Kentucky are family resource coordinators.
Absolutely.
If you use them effectively.
Yes.
I love them.
If you use them effectively, and they're the conduit between home and school.
Absolutely.
So I'm thinking like this: if you're a good sized district and you haven't been in school for almost a year, well, more than a year now.
Yeah.
We have a lot. We have a lot of money left over right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've been using gasoline for transportation.
Right.
We have been feeding kids, all the kids, and all that kind of stuff. Take some of that money and put that towards social workers, mental health coordinators,
yes.
and more folks like Friskies. And I would employ all those folks over the summer to fill those gaps we've been talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would have learning hubs throughout the summer, and I would make school full days for those who want to attend school this summer. It's no longer the summer slide; it's the COVID slide. But not only the teaching part, but the social emotional learning part. And I would pay teachers double. They would work those learning hubs throughout the year, because every student is not going to take you up on that, because they don't have to, because some of them got what they needed, but a lot of them hadn't. So we want to go the whole summer just not doing anything and then start school in August like nothing happened.
Right. That's good.
So I would build in some support systems throughout the summer that would also provide teachers an opportunity to work in the summer. They don't have to be in Walmart, somewhere like that, but also try to close on those gaps. And so when school starts in August, they're not as far behind, and put that strain on the students and the teachers.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
But that's just Roger. That's just Roger. What do I know?
Killing it. Yeah, it's great stuff. I love the creativity in it too, and kind of stepping outside of the box a bit. And it's awesome stuff. Thank you so much.
I was thinking about how my seniors last year didn't get their full year, so they missed some things, but they also missed some advising and instruction on how do I make that transition from high school to college. And so I was just grateful that even though I was off in the summer, I was able to work with my kids. But once they graduate from high school, they have to sign FERPA. Mm-hmm. So my kids had to put me on their FERPA, so I could help them. And it was just crazy, because that's nothing we've ever had to think about. Mm-hmm. So when they would call in August and say, Miss Lewis, I don't have the right schedule. Miss Lewis, my money's not hitting my account right. Miss Lewis, this and this. Because they put me on their forms, I was able to assist them at the college level.
That's amazing.
Just because they graduate from high school, they're still my kids. So they're still mine. And people ask me, well, what is your why? If my kids are successful, then I'm successful. That's the bottom line.
That's good.
If my kids are successful, I'm successful, and I've done what I've been called to do.
I love that. I love that, Charlize. I think that's amazing.
That's the call. And so I've gotta, as we're trying to wrap up, but we could be talking all night, because that's what we do.
I know, this is such a good topic.
So one of the questions I need to broach is, Fayette County Public Schools is looking for a new superintendent.
Yeah.
What type of qualities does this individual have to be successful in this urban district?
Oh, well, first of all, you just said it. They need to have experience in an urban district, preferably in a district that is minority majority. I think a lot of people don't realize, unless you're in the education arena, they don't realize we have more children on free reduced lunch than we do there's not.
Absolutely.
We have more students of color than we have white students. We have we're in an urban district, whether we want to claim it or not. So you need someone who's had those experiences. We need someone who understands equity. And I don't mean a question like, do you believe in diversity, equity, inclusion? That's great. We don't need a philosophical answer. We want to say, how did you implement that in your last district? So we don't want a philosophical question. Do you really believe equity is important? You value diversity? Well, that's great, but have you done it? We need somebody who has a record of been a champion for this and actually implemented. You know, when you were a superintendent your last district, did you try to get a racial equity policy? Do you have a racial equity plan? You know, do you have these things? Do you have an equity scorecard to show that you were about your business? So those kinds of things need to be addressed as we try to get a new superintendent. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, it would be, I don't know how to describe it, but we would be remiss if we bring in 3 finalists and not have any ethnic diversity in those finalists. Matter of fact, it'd be disrespectful to our community, as diverse as our community is in our enrollment, if you bring in, because I know, if you say you can't find them, well, hire this firm. I can find, you know, some folks of color who are qualified to be superintendent in this district. And so I think the board needs to be held accountable about making sure that we have a diverse pool and then a diverse group of finalists. And that's important. And so, but the qualities really need to be not an instructional leader, but a learning leader. That means that person is learning from their staff, and they're also learning through other ways, not teaching, you know, but learning. And we've gone beyond this instructional leader thing. We need to have a leader, a learning leader, and model that. So if you want your teachers to go continue to professional development, things like that, are you doing the exact same thing? Your audio needs to match your video. So, but we need to really hold the board accountable. And I really don't know the folks on the board and things of that nature, but we need to. And I'm just kind of bothered at the fact, you know, the pandemic, because these listening sessions are virtual, and they're not the same thing, because you can't read people, right? You can't read people virtually, and I can read a room. You know, I know I can read Yolanda because she's throwing her hands up and, you know, that kind of stuff. But I need to see everything. And I just think that we need to really make sure that everyone is engaged in this process, and it's a fair and equitable process. And that's critical.
Yes, I agree. So as we're closing out, I've got the round robin questions. And so I'm going to ask these questions. Now, just give me your first answer. So here we go. Question number 1. What book would you recommend for a person who wants to begin to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion from a historical standpoint?
Oh, gosh. From a historical, Miseducation of the Negro.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Now, what about from a more current perspective?
I can't remember the, I have 2, Culture Responsive Teaching and the Brain. And I can't think of her name. Zaretta Hammond is the author of that. And Let's Talk About Race.
Okay. Reason I'm asking is because people that are listening or watching or whatever, they need to write this down. You know, we're building our bookshelves, okay? So the next thing is, if you could go back in time and meet someone, who would it be?
Oh, gosh.
Come on.
Maybe my, this may sound a little crazy, maybe my great uncle, I think it was. He was a Buffalo soldier in Colorado. So I like to think about that experience, you know. So yeah, maybe him. But a lot of others, though, you know, there's a ton of them, you know.
Yeah, but that's good, though. That's good. I think we had Divine Karama on, and he said he wanted to meet some of his ancestors in his lineage, too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So here's a good one.
Yeah.
Oh,
Rarely hear men talk about self-care and unplugging. So what do you do for self-care and unplugging?
Gosh, I do a couple of things. One, I try to unplug as much as possible. I try to focus in the circle of influence versus circle of concern. Circle of concern is things that you have no influence over. or little, and you stress out, and that causes you more stress, things, circle of influence, you have influence over that. And so sometimes when I don't get what I want, new job or whatever, that's fine, because I believe sometimes, you know, it may be your turn, but not your time.
Come on.
Right? That's the mental part of that. But then to just to chill and self-care, just put me on a golf course for about 4.5 hours. Right.
Nice.
And I get to rap with some other brothers, and we got all day long. And that's one way. Just out there and sometimes just reading.
That's good.
That's good. That's good. Because I think if somebody would ask me what my husband does for self-care, I don't know that I would have an answer.
Work. I can answer work.
Right.
But here's the other thing. It may not be a bad thing. I mean, you don't need to work too much, but really, if what you're doing you really love, you never work a day in your life anyway.
Good point. Good point.
Right. So, but you still got to take some time off, Robert Lewis.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's less stressful if you love it. That's for sure.
Yes. And thank you so much for saying that out loud from Kappa brother. Thank you.
That's right. Sometimes you got to know, a job, when you go to a job, you have to be somebody else. But when you have a career, you get to be yourself. Right.
That's
so you're really not going to work.
Yeah. Just being yourself. That's good stuff.
All right, Yolanda, you going to close us out?
Okay. Are we going to do the last round robin question, or are we just going to
whatever you're going to do?
I'm going to ask the last round robin question, and then we're going to roll out, because I think this is a good one, especially when we're talking about school leadership and all of that. So let's see. What qualities does a school leader need to have in order to be able to serve all students? What do you think, Dr. Cleveland?
What qualities? Integrity, trustworthy, and authenticity. You need to be real, even if it's bad news. So, some integrity, be able to be, trusted, and authenticity, and respectful.
Yes.
Of all groups of folks and stakeholders that you work with.
Yeah, that's good. And that's interesting too, because when I was a substitute teacher, when I first went in, I learned that you cannot fool the kids. They know if you're being real. They know if you really care. They know if you're genuine. So that was good. That was a great answer. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you so much again, Dr. Cleveland, for giving us some of your time and just dropping jewels on us the whole podcast. We appreciate you so much. And thank you to all of our listeners who joined us today. Thank you for being a part of our table as we continue to shape our dialogue around real life issues and real talk solutions. Remember, you can find and subscribe to our podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Pocket Cast, and Radio Public. Join us next time as we strive to be authentic, be transparent, and be inspired. Thank you so much, Dr. Cleveland.